Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Doctor Who Literature. The Doctor Who world lost one of its shining lights from the 1980s, Christopher H. Bidmead, about 2 months ago. The following is a tribute episode from the Doctor Who Literature archives with some new material. You're going to hear an episode co-produced by Jim Sangster and myself. The format will be as follows. You're going to hear readings by Jim from each of Chris Bidmead's three Doctor Who novelizations, Logopolis, Castrovalva, and Frontios. You will hear an excerpt from my interview with Doctor Who author Jonathan Blum on Logopolis. You will hear an excerpt from my interview with Doctor Who podcaster and now host of the Comics Code, Graham Burke, talking about Castrovalva. And then you will hear my audio essay on Frontios, the novelization, from early in the year 2023. Following the review of the Frontios novelization, I am pleased to present a brand new interview with Andrew Smith, the author of Full Circle, both on TV and of the novelization, and a colleague and friend of Chris Bidmead. Thanks very much to Andrew for sitting down with me back in August. My thanks as well to Jim Sangster, without whom this episode would not exist, and also to our executive producer, David Barsky, for moral support and a critical eye. Doctor Who Literature will return with its final season in about 2 weeks with our episode on Delta and the Bannerman, and then after that there'll be an episode about every 2 weeks for each book after Delta and the Bannerman until we reach the end of Doctor Who's target publication schedule with The Paradise of Death, the novelization of the Jon Pertwee radio serial. But all that is in the future. For now, let's get to it.
The baffled constable looked into the telephone and then banged it on his helmet to try to improve the connection. If his attention hadn't been so engaged with the receiver, he might have noticed a distinct wobble coming over the police box. Its blue surface shimmered momentarily and grew bluer. The whirring sound stopped, but then so did the voice at the other end as the line went dead. The constable looked ruefully at the telephone. Now he would have to cycle all the way back to the station and get permission from the super personally, by which time the sun would doubtless be gone, and with it the prospect of a relaxing afternoon in the garden potting out the sweet peas. This speculation was the constable's last thought in this world. As he replaced the receiver, his face was suddenly slammed up against the blue door, as if, but that was impossible, something inside the box had grabbed his hand. His arm disappeared up to the shoulder. His head lolled back, the eyes staring. As the throttled terminal gasp bubbled away to a whisper in his throat, from inside the box echoed the light, delicate sound of a chuckle.
And then Logopolis hits, and it absolutely blows my mind. I'm sure on my first viewing I couldn't follow about half of it there, but I was just staggered by the import of this story and the sense of just there was a magic to it. It was like Doctor Who had become something like nothing else on TV that I had seen. And I think this is around the time where I went from enjoying watching Doctor Who to becoming a full-on fan. It was around that little stretch of time. This is again late 83, possibly trailing into early 1984. I am falling in love with this show in a whole new way. And then the novelization hits, and it blows my mind all over again. I mean, there's this sudden flowering, I think, of the books that came out in around 1982, where suddenly in rapid succession you get the books for Full Circle and Warrior's Gate and Logopolis, all of which are not just doing a retelling of the television story with like little bits of embroidery around the edges. They are doing these things as novels. They are departing from the stories. They are bringing in like stuff from outside myths and legends and allusions to other things, and the sense of Doctor Who as not just, you wouldn't just pick up the Doctor Who book of the month and read it on its own. This is becoming a continuing saga of an unfolding story. The way that all those things are changing the status quo. It's not just a rare occasional event where a companion leaves, or suddenly things can happen unexpectedly. That was what I was really picking up here. That was this sense of surprise around all this. And then just reading the book and the prose in Logopolis, I really do think that it's this book in particular that spoiled me for Terrance Dicks's novelizations in terms of the writing. Because Terrance's stuff, when you go back and look at it, he writes stuff that is very spare, but with these occasional actual gemstones of perfect
Yes.
phrase, perfect description. And then you hit Logopolis, and it's like someone has taken this whole jewelry box full of gemstones there and just dumps it over your head. It is relentless in terms of the sheer number of moments of just magical, evocative prose and things that could not have been brought across the same way on TV. And there's witty lines that are just part of the Doctor's sort of skewed internal monologue, and just all the stuff that is not quite explained, but that somehow makes sense nonetheless. This was, as I was beginning to discover, Doctor Who could actually be like a novel, not just a novelization, but something which had literary value to it. And I was just beginning to get these concepts into my head at age 11 here, and it was the first step on the way, I think, to becoming a reader on a whole different kind of level than I had previously been. And possibly that's a step on the way to becoming a writer.
So I want to step back then, and Bill, you've given us some really interesting points to work with. So let's step back and re-examine some of what you've said. You talk about discovering unexpectedly Doctor Who seasons 16, 17, and 18. Now, it's fascinating because each one of those seasons is a hermetically sealed universe. It's 3 years, 3 different script editors. You have Anthony Reed doing the Key to Time season. And you have some incredibly funny stories in that season because you have Robert Holmes. You have Douglas Adams. You have 2 in a row from David Fisher. Now, the last 2 stories of the season are probably not as well regarded in fandom as some of the others, but the stretch that you get from Rebos Operation Part 1 through Androids of Tara Part 4 is about as great a stretch as we've gotten in Doctor Who since the Hinchcliffe years, because season 15 is, in some respects a dip in quality. Season 16 is a gem. Then you go to season 17. Douglas Adams graduates from writing one story to becoming the script editor, and he's trying desperately to put hard science on the show, but the writers aren't always cooperating. And then the last story never gets made because of never gets completed, I should say, because of the BBC strike. So season 17 divided fandom for a long time, but when you go back and look at it now, it's got some phenomenal stories in there, and not just the obvious ones. And when it came out on Blu-ray, there was this nice public reevaluation of how good season 17 is. It's not just City of Death. Many of the other stories in there are equally good. And then you come to season 18. Now you come to Christopher H. Bidmead, who's putting a lot more. He's putting in the hard science that Douglas Adams wanted to do, but getting scripts like The Horns of Nymon made that difficult. Christopher H. Bidmead is giving us lectures on tachyonics. You have your chronic hysteresis. You have E-space. You have a meditation on evolution. You have back-to-back colony ship stories. And then for the first time, really, with Warriors Gate and Logopolis, you get stories that don't explain all of the goings-on to you. So it's up to the reader to try and work for themselves from the clues what exactly is happening. The novelization of Warriors Gate I covered on the show last month, and the novelization of Warriors Gate explains everything, but it explains it in poetic terms. So again, the reader does have to do a little bit of thinking. And Logopolis is the same thing. In the book, Bidmead explains who the Watcher is, and he explains a lot more of the science. But again, he's writing in poetry, not just prose. So whereas Terrance Dicks is going to start a book with a very declarative sentence about where you are. Through the ruins of the city stalk the ruins of a man. It was a place of infinite evil. Those are some of it was a place of ancient evil, I should say. Terrance did these great "you are there" opening sentences. The first sentence of Logopolis is poetry. Events cast shadows before them, but the huger shadows creep over us unseen. And that's the plot, but you don't know that it's the plot just yet because it hasn't happened yet. It's a really fascinating, grabbing sense, and it goes through my head a couple of times a month at least.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I loved about Bidmead's stuff in this case in particular, is that it is elliptical. I mean, Bidmead gets credit for his for bringing up the scientific elements of the show there, even though as I think Douglas Adams was actually had a fair bit of like solidly hard science and made it into stories like Nightmare of Eden. I think the thing is that Bidmead has a sense of presenting this stuff in a straight-faced way, whereas Adams making it look like it's a bit of a laugh meant that people didn't take it seriously as science fiction in that respect. But what I think Bidmead really masters there is that he catches and expresses the poetry of science in a way. Specifically, it is that combination of the real scientific idea and the sort of mythic extrapolation of it. I mean, the fact that he starts out with that wonderful description of entropy. I'm trying to see if I can find the line again there where he actually says where he describes entropy as basically the rust on the wheels, the weeds in the vegetable garden, and a sense of disorder and chaos that's expressed in that poetic terms, and then gradually builds that up till he's sort of extended that idea of entropy to reflect the whole idea of the sort of despair that is facing the Doctor, and that he actually feels like what he needs to create in response to that is structure and positive action. And he's taken the literal idea and gotten more and more metaphorical until it has become this basically this idea that has no connection to the real science anymore, but that expresses a truth in that way that only poetry can. It's astonishing, I think, and revisiting as a grown-up it was astonishing to see that yes, that really is the poetry of science.
And the novelization even gets further into it, because the novelization talks about Maxwell's laws. The novelization talks about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which I would have heard about for the first time reading this book at age 11. There's literal poetry as Adric reads Paradise Lost. And then there's a line that I know has great meaning for you, John. What is the first law of crisis?
Yes. The line that he throws away early on in the book is that the Doctor refers to the first law of crisis as panic about one thing at a time. And that is something that I've had to introduce my boss to at work when he's been having some moments there, and he absolutely embraced this, and has genuinely become a useful effect. Of course, what's also wonderful is that line of the first law of crisis is not just Bidmead being gratuitously witty, which he is known to do. That line pays off at the end of the book, as I found out on rereading. Just a passing mention as the Doctor is like dealing with being shot at by the Master and this very thing. He evokes the first law of crisis and focuses only on disconnecting the cable.
I'm going to read the passage because I have it flagged because I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
This is page 124. The Doctor jerked his head round to look back and was astonished to find the Master's face grinning at him from behind the glass of the control room window. Of course, with his target so close to the antenna, the Master dared not risk firing a high-energy beam. A ricochet could disrupt transmission. But what was he up to now? The Doctor dismissed the question and, obeying the first law of crisis, concentrated on the cable. And, of course, he basically dies on the very next page. So you're right. I had forgotten that the first law of crisis comes back and is the way the Doctor gets out of the crisis, gets out of the plot, and unfortunately gets out of his fourth regeneration.
Yeah, and I mean the things like that pay off. I think that the events casting shadows before themselves, which basically is the explanation of the Watcher that is then dangled as a mystery until literally the last page of the book, or the hints get more and more clear as they go along. But still, that's the theme that sets up from the very beginning, runs to the end. I mean, Kate and I would tend to steal that for our books directly. I mean, we tended to go for first sentences that set up themes and images that would pay off throughout. I mean, the opening of Vampire Science about the girl was headed for a fall. That kind of thing is I think this is where it begins for me, really, learning that you could do that sort of extension of the imagery. In fact, you mentioned something else there when you were talking about the things the other influence it brings in. One of the things I loved on reread that I didn't pick up at the time was that, yes, they introduced Milton. They introduced the idea of Adric coping with the idea of actually reading poetry and the rhythm and identifying the Lucifer with the Master and all that imagery stuff there. But then he calls back to that later on when the Monitor is reading out the numbers in Logopolis in their language there and the rhythm of it there, And Adric makes the connection with the poetry. I mean, literally, it is the poetic aspects of the science, of the scientific exploration and the actual science and the science fiction. And I mean, if there's one other little description that I'd flagged, which I'm trying to find the page again. This is on 105. I've got it in my notes. Yes, where it's just a passing description of a circuit board that as the Doctor is rummaging around in the bubble memory, and there's just a line there in which he's removing it from the computer. The thing he eased out was a long rectangle, the color of emerald, to which was attached a neat pattern of small objects that looked like large flat beetles with silver legs. Tegan recognized them as some sort of electronic component. What kind of a man looks at a circuit board and sees that and brings that image back to us? That's just genius.
And I will echo you on page 59. This is the monitor chanting the code into his speaker. The sound was meaningless to Adric. It was composed of short words that the monitor articulated with great clarity, carefully separating each from the next as though every syllable were precious. Somehow Adric was reminded of the words in the story about the angel. That's Christopher H. Bidmead is writing a love letter to science and computer programming, and he's putting it in poetic terms that would not occur to most of us.
It's like there's this wonderful sense of Christopher Bidmead as a genuine eccentric mind in the best way that comes across here in these books. That this is someone who, we don't know this at the time, but this is as young fans, because we are in my case an incipient computer nerd, and responding to all these sorts of elements there as of the computer side of thing. We don't know that this is also a guy who was hanging out in theater circles in London in the late 60s, dating Helen Mirren, and generally having a life that goes well outside of what you would think of as your straight up nerd into something very artistic and insightful, and in some cases possibly drug-addled, I have to wonder about.
Tegan and Nyssa looked out of the window, gazing in wonder and fear at what they saw. Below them and above them, the whole of Castrovalva, square, walks, archways, colonnades, steps, porticos, gazebos and balustrades, appeared as a jigsaw puzzle of pieces jammed together by a blind man with no regard for sense or shape. But it was the Castrovalvan population that unintentionally brought the final touch of horror to the scene. The washing women by the fountain, the collection of gossiping old men outside the library, and Ruther and Murgrave crossing the square together, deep in conversation. Each seemed heedless of the illogical geography, and moved in their separate and various dimensions, up, down, sideways, and upside down, like dolls in a doll's house seen through a kaleidoscope.
It's my favorite Doctor Who novel, to be sure. In fact, I am on this podcast right now because of my dear friend Jim Sangster, who reviewed this in his Target Novel blog and said it wasn't very good. And I have this to say to you, Jim. You're going to have to bleep me. You were completely wrong on this. Okay, I'm here because I actually plotted out when I could be next on the show, because I had to say, because I'm here to say Castrovalva is an amazing book. It is I'm not the biggest fan of the TV version. I was a huge fan of it as a kid because, well, I'd say kid, I was 14, but because it was the first time I'd seen Peter Davison's Doctor. Obviously, it was the first time I'd really seen new Doctor Who, and it was kind of like the shock of the new was so amazing during it, and to sort of watch him sort of shed Tom Baker's gear, and then and then gradually kind of emerge, and the Masters there, and it's all very exciting, and I couldn't make a lick of sense of the plot, but it was really great, but over the years, watching Castrovalva again and again and again, it kind of suffers from that Chris Bidmead construction, and Logopolis is the same, where like episode 1 they're all separate episodes. They're just sort of sticky taped together in the most kind of, well, I think it will hold together, and it's just, but it's all sellotaped, and it's just barely holding together. And so you've got episode 1, which is entirely set in the TARDIS as it gets deeper and deeper, and then episode 2 is this weird transitional one where they eventually wind up on Castrovalva, but they sort of escape the jeopardy in the TARDIS. And then episodes 3 and 4 are in Castrovalva, but it's sort of it's sort of each one has their own kind of different focus. And so the fact that there's something to do with block transfers, which is barely explained in the previous story, so it's kind of just magic, I guess. So all this to say is that I think TV Castrovalva is a good 6 out of 10 story. I like it a lot, but when the feelings of nostalgia go, it's kind of just there. Great Patty Kingsland story. Great Patty Kingsland score, though.
Yes.
But let's talk about the book. The book is amazing because the book basically just pushes all these things together and makes it actually work as a cohesive whole. It makes it a giant journey, which is really, really wonderful. But the thing I love most about it, and I know yours isn't the podcast that does the readings. I just love the prose in this book. Here you go. So this is when they're doing the if moment and they're pushing the button to escape from winding in event 1. And so here this is what Bidmead writes, and I just love this. It's like,
the universe was brilliant with approaching stars that were now as close together as sunbeams dancing on water. Among the dazzling points of light, the tiny blue craft sped inconspicuously towards its doom, an oak leaf riding on a tidal flood. But nothing is inevitably so. Even the fixed discourse may change or may be changed. Quite suddenly, the police box became huge, exploding in a flash of dazzling blue light that dimmed the rushing cosmic panorama. The explosion seemed to drain color and substance from the craft, leaving, as the flash subsided, a ghostly TARDIS image, continuing on in the same course. In their inverted time scale, the stars drew closer and closer until they were packed like pebbles on a beach, like grains of sand, like molecules in granite, and like the atoms of a diamond. And then it was event 1, the beginning of everything, a sharp white nothing that blotted out the worlds to come.
I freaking love that. Like, that is like brilliant quality prose. That is like, it's great science fiction writing. It's just imaginative, really illustrative prose, and it's actually kind of, I read this book for the first time when I was 15, and it's talking to you in language that, unless you really care about school, it's not really, it's more grown up writing, and I just loved it for that kind of thoughtfulness to it. And the other passage, I'm going to pack out my readings, and then I'm done for the day. But I love this little bit from I love this little bit when the Doctor's climbing up the rocks and they have this bit, and I just love this little reference because it's something that you wish could have been in the TV production, because he says,
in fact, the Doctor had only the distant glimmer of an idea about where he was going. Something deep and instinctive was driving him upwards towards Castrovalva. Occasionally he stopped to examine the blood trail, and his eyes would wander over the edge of the path and down the steep hill to the hungry white teeth of the rocks below him. But apart from the giddiness, he remained unaware of the danger. His mind was filled with subliminal images of other dizzying heights, flashes of girders and gantries shaped like a giant bowl in the sky, from which someone he had once known well was swinging on a single cable that stretched and snapped strand by strand. A melee of echoing voices seemed to be calling, "Doctor!" voices from the past and from the future, jangling together in a desperate cacophony. He was not to know that among the confusion of sounds in his mind were the real shouts of Tegan and Nyssa, blown on the wind from far below. "Doctor!" the voices called, all of them in a ragged chorus, and he realized that he too was calling the Doctor, that he needed him urgently, and that somewhere along the white walls that crested the hill he might stand a chance of finding him.
I love that. That's something I genuinely wish could have been in the episode, because this brief flashback to just before he regenerated is so brilliant, and yeah, so the prose is littered with things like this all the way through. I just love it, and I love the fact that it sort of takes that kind of barely taped together kind of plot and makes it seem organic. I mean, there is great nostalgia attached to this book for me. I mean, I think we were talking about this on Twitter earlier today. Like, you look at the cover, like, I came to Doctor Who fandom in 1984, and by this point, this book had been out for a couple of years. But I remember coming to this book and several other Peter Davison photo covers all at once, and it's like, oh my God, this is Doctor Who in the future. This isn't just all the Tom Baker era and the 70s targets, which are all painted covers and kind of all the Patrick Troughton ones have all scenes that don't involve Patrick Troughton, and they're all like random figure on the cover of Enemy of the World. Why can't we, so like it's all that kind of thing. But here you suddenly get the photo covers, and I love the photo covers, and I love the Starfield, which, as you pointed out, is very much like the actual, title sequence. And it just feels like Doctor Who is new, and I love that element of it. And the thing that gives me the weirdest nostalgia about Castrovalva is the font. It's this weird serif font that's very modern looking. And it's whenever I look at it, the font alone of Castrovalva, I get chills and nostalgia. But no, overall, it's just a delight. And rereading the book for this, I was just struck at how organic it all seemed. Like, I was just amazed at how, like, it's so much more satisfying as a book to me than as a TV show.
There is an epitaph-worthy quote on just about every page of this book, and
yes, that's a great way of putting it.
In the other half of the show, after you leave us, when I do my audio essay on the text, I'm going to, not quite like what I did for the Logopolis episode where I did my top 12 lines, but I'm going to read out my favorite lines on the other half of the show. And you've read out two incredible passages. Those didn't even crack my top 10. There's just so much other great stuff. So I'm going to do now for you probably my all-time favorite passage in any of the many Doctor Who books that have come out between the 1960s and today. So this is page 92. And I don't have quite your mellifluous reading voice, or we had Conrad Westmus, a legitimate Big Finish actor, last week doing a 4-page reading out of Meglos. I don't have anything on you guys, but I'll do my best in my scratchy voice that makes Ben Shapiro's voice sound like a basso profundo. -5 for the Ben Shapiro reference. My kid is scowling at me from across the table. In the nearly 800 years of his being, much of that time spent in travel, the Doctor had arrived at the working hypothesis that experience is no substitute for books. And that, by the way, that is it. That is the line. Experience is no substitute for books. That is my mantra. That is my credo. That is, I'll put that on my gravestone epitaph at some point. That is it. But I'll keep going. Experience is no substitute for books. He had a healthy respect for anything his fellow creatures felt was worth committing to print, although the profuseness of their publications often made him wish that reading could be got through more quickly and writing made less easy, perhaps with a universal rule that all books be hand-carved in granite with a pin. And this is not just flowery prose. This leads up to the important plot point that really unravels the mystery. The books are old.
Yeah.
The books are 1,200 years old, but they chronicle the rise of Castrovalva up to the present day, which is one of my favorite revelations ever.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm just thick enough that I didn't really get the nuance of it on the TV version, but in the book I really got it. It was like, oh, that's what it means. Yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a certain immediacy to how Bidmead kind of situates you in the text that really makes it kind of hit home as a revelation. Most of the revelations of the book kind of have that way.
And you and I had talked about this on Reality Bomb 3.5 years ago when I did a brief appearance on the show after Terrence Dix passed away, and you did a Terrence tribute episode. You had asked me what was Terrence's greatest contribution to the worlds of Doctor Who, and I had mentioned that, according to Christopher H. Bidmead, Doctor Who's most important special effect was words. Mm-hmm. And that certainly comes through because the TV dialogue is sparkling. I think I'm a much bigger fan of the TV serial than you are, but there's just sparkling dialogue all over the place. And
there is.
The book takes all that sparkling dialogue and surrounds it by sparkling prose. So we could read from this thing all day, and I think we have. But
yeah.
It was a repellent sight, a huge and hideous assembly of parts of human bodies, shaped something in the form of a giant tractator. White bones, tipped with metal cutters, scraped against the rock, while rotting hands polished the surface smooth. Through illuminated windows in the body, Tegan glimpsed more mechanically gesticulating human arms and legs in an advanced state of decay. It was a machine built from the dead. But not just the dead. In a hollowed-out area at the front of the machine, between the forward cutters that spun to left and to right, crouched a shape that was recognizably human. Tendrils of many colors connected the head into the machine, and as it emerged into the light, they saw the figure was alive. A living mind enslaved to drive the machine. Living, but in a fearfully wasted state. Tegan recognized the face from the portraits she had seen in the medical shelter and the stateroom. It was Captain Revere.
Doctor Who, Frontios, by Christopher H. Bidmead, televised as Frontios, teleplay by Christopher H. Bidmead, televised in January and February 1984, paperback release date December 10th, 1984, target book number 91, cover artist Andrew Skilleter. The TARDIS has drifted far into the future and comes to rest hovering over Frontios, refuge in one group of survivors from Earth who have escaped the disintegration of their home planet.
Fleeing from the imminence of a catastrophic collision with the Sun, a group of refugees from the doomed planet Earth...
Yes, that's enough, Tello.
The Doctor is reluctant to land on Frontios, as he does not wish to intervene in a moment of historical crisis. The colonists are still struggling to establish themselves, and their continued existence hangs in the balance. But the TARDIS is forced down by what appears to be a meteorite storm and crash lands, leaving the Doctor and his companions marooned on the hope-forsaken planet. Doctor Who fandom is not a static thing, and my opinions constantly evolve. I would have first seen Frontios on TV mere days after the novelization's paperback release date. I've said many times on this program, and doubtless will say many times more, that the Enlightenment Part 1 cliffhanger was the moment after which I never voluntarily missed another Doctor Who episode. Voluntarily being the operative word, of course. I did still miss episodes, especially in the early days of my fandom when I didn't yet have my own set of blank VCR tapes with which to record the show when I wasn't going to be home. Long Island's power utility in the mid-80s, then known as Lilco, the Long Island Lighting Company, was often known for inexplicably long blackouts, which would also make watching Doctor Who impossible. And so it was that I missed Part 1 of Frontios when my PBS station first aired it. Don't remember what the specific reason was anymore. I just missed it. Kids today, of course, have no idea of the struggle. They no longer have to miss anything. But it's a character-building experience to miss a particular serial's first act, and have to piece together, in Part 2, just what happened in the opener, while still keeping track of the unfolding text. This was before I had the Lofisier program guide, so I had no idea that the next episode after The Awakening, which I'd loved, but more on that in a few weeks, was called Frontios, and indeed my initial reaction to the Part 2 opening credits, and I still remember this almost 39 years later, was that the word was like the breakfast cereal. Frontios! In 1984, Frontios was not my favorite story. I knew nothing, at age 11, about the making of a TV show, other than behind-the-scenes glimpses occasionally shown on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which, yes, I was still watching, over my kid sister's shoulder at the time. I didn't know about set design, or directing, or studio space, or tight production schedules. It was a shock to me when the How Stammer's Walker handbooks came out in the 90s, and I learned that all these serials were shot on just 6 days of studio, for example. I also at the time would not have known that Ron Jones was, compared to Peter Grimwade or Fiona Cumming, who directed Bidmead's first 2 Doctor Who serials, comparatively feeble. but I did know intuitively that I didn't like stories that attempted outdoor scenes indoors, or that were made up primarily of gloomy tunnels or slow-moving aliens in bulky costumes. That opinion of Frontios held for a few decades. When I watched the story in 2018 or 2019 and sent a review to Stacy Smith's ratings guide, I likened it to The Godfather Part 3, a decent story, perhaps in its own right, but a far cry from the first two outings. And yes, I put Logopolis and Castrovalva right up there in quality and enjoyment, alongside the first two Godfathers. Don't at me. But then I watched Frontios again, as part of my Twitter pilgrimage in autumn 2021, and boy, did it suddenly land for me. Davison's humor, finally playing the Doctor the way he wanted to play the role. Mark Strickson's intensity as Turlough is dazzling. The guest cast is quirky. Bidmead having a better handle on dialogue and motivation for even his tertiary characters than did, say, a Johnny Byrne or an Eric Sayward. Paddy Kingsland's score was in my head for days afterward. This is, sadly, Kingsland's final work on Doctor Who, but he did get to score all three of Bidmead's scripts. And yes, just like Nino Rota was such an essential element to the success of the Godfather movies, so too is Paddy Kingsland to the success of Bidmead. So, with that assessment of the TV story out of the way, there's the book. Let's get to it. Frontios the novelization is what you would expect from a story about the malevolent forces of gravity. It is densely packed and gripping. In fact, arguably more so than its TV parent. Frontios in book form is the story that Christopher H. Bidmead wanted to tell on TV, but couldn't, because the script he submitted ran too long when filmed, and because he included too many sets. 1984, when there wasn't enough budget to erect a TARDIS corridor in studio to run alongside the console room. Oh, and also Ron Jones, not to speak ill of the deceased, but Bidmead, remember, had Grimwade and Fiona Cumming direct his first two stories. He probably was not expecting to have to get saddled with Ron Jones, whose visual style was so static that he makes Michael Mann movies seem to have a lively pace. But, as you'd expect from the witty wordsmith who penned the Logopolis and Castrovalva books, see episodes 72 and 76 of this podcast respectively, Frontios the novel is jam-packed with Bidmead's signature observational humor. Few wrote the Doctor to Peter Davison's strengths, better than El Bid. For example, glasses, like the Doctor wears, are described as, quote, occasionally useful for reading, when the print was very small, or the book unusually dull. Turlough, who I came to appreciate more and more during my last two Davison watch-throughs, and of course getting to see the man in person at Gallifrey 2021, which is one of the most fun convention interviews I've ever seen, is thrown when the Doctor demands his help during a surgery. Quote, it turned out that the Doctor needed somebody to hold his coat. Many laugh-out-loud passages. But, and this is new for Bidmead in his third novelization, the book is graphic in its images of vile body horror, trading away the lyrical worlds of Logopolis and Castrovalva for the grisly tractators and their corpse-driven machines that director Ron Jones either wouldn't or couldn't realize. The opening TARDIS scene is funny, with Bidmead's characteristic wit describing the way the Doctor and Turlough are each driving themselves to distraction out of boredom. Our introduction to the people of Frontios is also amusing. Mr. Range, the fussy civilian science officer, quote, continued to flutter like a pigeon looking for the best foothold on a statue, and tons of other funny similes. Bidmead works in observational humor from his day job as a technical writer. Tegan reads a handbook that refers her to Appendix F, even though the handbook only goes through Appendix D. This must surely be based on the author's personal experience. Two random Frontios techies are named for Kernighan and Ritchie, the inventors of the C programming language. Someone on Rekart's Doctor Who 30 years ago, when asked which Doctor Who book featured characters named Kernighan and Ritchie, responded, the Sea Devils. And the political barbs are very good, in a story about a colony in civil war and ruled by an inept youth named, of all things, Plantagenet. Brazen worried about, quote, wild speculations that were dangerous, not because they were true, but because they were believed. the perfect description of America in the age of Trump, written in 1984.
My home. Tractators. I've seen all this before.
Quick, we must get into the service and get help.
He's speaking, Father. I think it's important.
They were there, waiting, destroying us from inside.
Sounds like something coming up from his past, like a memory picture.
Once, long ago, on my home.
You remember them?
We remember them. The people of my planet will never forget.
It's more than his past. It sounds like deep ancestral memory.
Tractators. Once, long ago, my home was an infection.
Bidmead adds mystery to the book by liberal use of foreshadowing, directly telling the reader that the main characters are unaware of something strange or mysterious that's going on around them. We're told, as soon as he meets Tegan and Turlough, that Cockerell is extraordinary. This is bizarre if you're coming straight from the DVD, because Cockerell has hardly anything to do on the air. But the book being a director's cut, come to find out that Bidmead put Cockerell in a dozen other scenes that didn't get broadcast. Cockerell in the book has a distinctly heroic story arc, with a happy ending, compared to the TV broadcast where he vanishes without explanation halfway through Part 4. The book puts him back where he belongs, and is more interesting for it. The Doctor by Bidmead is great, isn't he? The Fifth Doctor, quote, often made the mistake of assuming everyone else was as clever as he was. Bidmead neatly transitions from a moment of Brazen ordering the Doctor's capture to Brazen having, quote, been completely chased out of the Doctor's thoughts. The New Adventures novels of the 1990s intentionally avoided writing from the Doctor's POV to keep him mysterious. But Bidmead is inside his head the whole book, and it's a hoot, with the Doctor mentally composing jokes about, quote, the gravity of the situation, while in the grip of the gravis. Deleted TV dialogue restored for the book gives the Doctor a nice speech about the importance of mathematics, too. And of course, who could forget the awesomeness of Peter Davison negotiating with the story's principal bad guy.
I'd like to negotiate a surrender.
There is nothing to negotiate.
Oh, absolutely. You can have it all. Frontiers, its unhappy occupants, the lot. I don't think it's fair for us Time Lords to interfere.
You admit you assent?
Well, why should we let a bunch of stuffed shirts deprive you of your own form of transportation, however primitive?
Primitive?
Well, in comparison to Gallifrey and time technology, of course, but then what isn't?
The TARDIS.
What, this? Oh, yes, well, as I was saying, you can have Frontiers, all the fixtures and fittings appertaining thereunto, and I'll pull my TARDIS together and get off your patch.
I should like to see it. This TARDIS.
Well, it's not all here at the moment, you understand. It's been spatially distributed to optimize the packing efficiency of, the real-time envelope.
The power of travel is beautiful, Doctor. Very beautiful.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, as you can see from this panel, Gravis, I control all the main TARDIS functions, the time coordinates, spatial coordinates, all inoperative at the moment, of course, because the spatial distribution circuits are switched in. Ah, now you really will have to be more careful, Gravis. Now the autoscan's picking up the location of all the concealed TARDIS components. Oh, well, not to worry. I shouldn't think it's even within your powers to reassemble them. Besides, what would you want with an old Type 40 time and relative dimension in space machine,
But I do want it, Doctor. The TARDIS. Infinite travel within my grasp.
Oh, no, Gravis, please. Take everything else, but leave me the TARDIS.
I will have it.
Oh, no, Gravis, please, I beg you. Spare me.
And I could listen to that scene all day long. And in the assembly process of editing this episode, I probably have. But let's move on to more important things, like my words, rather than Chris Bidmead's. Unfortunately, as witty and entertaining a writer as Bidmead is, the book also eventually needs to have a strong plot to keep the reader guessing, and good mini cliffhangers at each chapter to prevent the reader from putting the book down. This is where Frontios falls a little bit short compared to Bidmead's other work. The plot is familiar, the same colony ship in trouble that we saw in back-to-back stories under Bidmead's tenure as script editor, Full Circle and State of Decay, but has no real unique twists or revelations, apart from the budget-saving device of not introducing the monsters until Part 3. Tonally, the book is all over the place, like one passage where Turlo amusingly sees his reflection as, quote, a freckled smudge, but then imagines his flesh rotting away to the skull. Ugh. Works for Poltergeist the movie, not quite so much in the book. And I didn't need that image in my head, thank you very much. And while budgetary concerns on TV caused the Gravis to speak in RP from his own lips, the book restores one of Bidmead's less felicitous scripted ideas, a cadaverous translator machine, made up of a dismembered colonist. Again, ew. In terms of stuff the editor might have missed, Norna has her mouth gagged and stuffed full of food, and then, trying to escape a few sentences later, grips a knife between her teeth. I think we know which day lunch was served early at the Target offices. But while those 2 paragraphs of obligatory minor complaints are there in an effort to be even-handed, it really doesn't bother me, not with witty prose like this elsewhere in the book. Quote, as these Frontios people did everything so badly, escaping shouldn't be too difficult. Or, the Doctor was not very fond of tunnels. They were frequently damp, dark, deep, and dangerous, and as a method of transport ranked only a little higher than sitting absolutely still, underwater, waiting for the right current. That may actually be a Logopolis callback, come to think of it. Frontios at times is a bit dreary on TV. It is probably the least remembered of Bidmead's contributions to the series. It is also probably one of the high points of the Davison era. The book is, for me, not quite as quotable as the previous novelizations, although it's not too far off, but in many ways it is superior to the TV broadcast, and if you haven't come around to love Frontios the long way around, the novelization will have you considering the story in a much improved light. So, Andrew, I wish we could be meeting under happier circumstances. I know we have not recorded together in a while, but I reached out to you after the news broke about Christopher H. Bidmead passing away. He was, I believe, 83, which seems very young these days.
Yeah. Did I read 84? But no, you could be right. Well, I don't know about young. It's not bad actually. It's not bad, and yeah, but it doesn't matter. Really, when someone gets an older age, it's still unpleasant when they're no longer around. And Chris was, yeah, someone who left his mark.
He had been foundational for me in my discovering Doctor Who, because I had discovered the TV series on PBS here in the States, but it was getting a copy of this book, the Logopolis novelization, because I was a compulsive reader when I was 11. Reading half of this book during a lunch hour at school
Yeah.
made me just a fan of him and of the show, and this was the moment that I couldn't turn back. So I was showing you all 3 of my Christopher H. Bidmead novelizations, and you actually have them in front of you as well.
We have all 3 here. Hardback given to me by Chris, and also Castrovalva and Frontios.
And your copy of the Logopolis novelization is autographed, I believe.
Yes, he wrote a nice little note for me inside there when he gave it to me. Yeah, which is very nice.
I never had the pleasure of meeting him, apart from some interactions on Usenet in the 1990s and Twitter a couple of years ago. When did you first meet Chris? Was it in relation, I guess, with the Full Circle script?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's the day he commissioned it. I came. I was living in Glasgow. We'd had I'd there was a story idea I'd sent into Douglas Adams when he was script editor. So Douglas had me down to visit the studio, and I'd been in contact with Robert Holmes before and Tony Reid as well. So Chris had taken over from Douglas, had this storyline that I'd sent in called The Planet That Slept, and Chris and I spoke on the phone about it, and he said, unfortunately, you live too far away to write for the show. I was living in Glasgow, and which made me quite crestfallen. But he said, "Oh, come down and we'll talk about, you know, how you get into writing." Because I didn't just want to write for Doctor Who, and but it was always there. That's how I got it. Actually, I'd been trying for 4 years, and but Doctor Who was always there when other shows ended their runs. But he said, "Come down and we'll just talk about, you know, getting into writing and what you can do." And I walked in the office before I even sat down. He said, "We'd like to commission you to write episode 1, and if we like it, we'll commission the next 3." And then I was gobsmacked. I was absolutely in my head. There was fireworks going off. I think I've described it before, and I couldn't believe it. It was the last thing I expected, and I then went into basically a script meeting with him. We were joined by John Nathan Turner, and about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think. We went over it, and we went over what they were doing with the season and what Chris wanted to do and what John wanted to do. It was just music to my ears. And then the odd thing about I was going to be writing the first of a trilogy, and I was going to be introducing a new companion. It was all, "Oh, hello," rubbing my hands. It was, but I had to deliver. I had to deliver on that first script, and I Anyway, that's when I first met Chris, and he just think about it. That's when I first met him, and I haven't commented on this before, but he just seemed like an energized character right from the first moment I met him.
So you would have been, I believe, the youngest scriptwriter for Doctor Who at that point. I believe you were still in your teens. Was there any intimidation factor in meeting him?
Sorry, Ben Aronovich has told me he's quite narked, because if it wasn't for me, he'd be the youngest. Sorry, Ben. Sorry, mate.
Was there any intimidation factor sitting with him and JNT in the room for 2 hours with you getting your very first commission?
Absolutely not. No. And I mean, my age didn't come into it. I just knew what I wanted to do, and I was writing, and I was 17, but I felt about it the same way I would have done if I'd been 27 or older, you know. No, there's certainly no intimidation. And a lovely thing about the whole process, I was never patronised by Chris or by John. I was treated very much like the writer, which I was. You know, they didn't talk down to me at all.
So what was the give and take, the editing process like? And I ask because it's been mentioned in several places that Christopher H. Bidmead's season on Doctor Who season 18 was markedly different in tone from what had come before, with more of an emphasis on harder science. Was there any back and forth between you and him with regards to the tone of your script or the science content?
Not the tone. I don't remember anything specifically about the science content. We talked about the nature of the whole setup with the mist and everything, and Chris came up with an interesting thing where he compared it, and this was after we'd locked the script, actually, where we're going to the read-through acted, and he compared it to the cargo cults of Africa. Just a routine and a setting up of processes. So not the tone. Actually, one thing that struck me in that very first meeting, I said, their plans for the season were music to my ears, and that kind of chimed with the kind of Doctor Who I wanted to be writing. There'd been a lot of humour in season 17, some of it scripted and some of it coming from Tom, which is quite well documented, and it's right there. You see the TARDIS console going patang 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 in Hordes of Daimon.
Right, K9. Without our gravitic anomalizer, this is the best we can do. Let's give it a try, shall we? Come on, old girl. That's very odd.
But yeah, I very early in that meeting, I thought Chris is talking about, and John are talking about the kind of show that and the kind of Doctor Who that I wanted to write. The science came into it. I mean, with the editing process. So, I mean, it was obviously different back in those days. I was working on a typewriter with sheets of paper and carbon paper, and posting them off. Posting off 2 copies to Chris, and then he'd come back with notes. And I think I came down once for a meeting. It wasn't done so remotely as it is now. Some of it was done on the phone. And then there was, I think the 4th draft or something. Chris did a pass which there were quite a few changes, which threw me a little at the time, and kind of rocked me a little. But I then found out he was doing it later, considerably later. I found out he did it with just every script, and then I reworked that as well. But it's interesting. Some of the scientific terminology that's in there was put in by Chris. I do specifically remember the read through. And this really only came back to me yesterday because someone else had asked me about the science. And in the read through, there's a line about leucine, isoleucine, methionine, all the usual amino acids. And I forget whose line it was, whoever it was turned to me and said, "Is that right? Have I pronounced it right?" And I was like, I had no. Chris had put them in. I was like, yeah. And Chris was there. He didn't speak up, but I went, yeah. I had no idea. But so just little things like that.
What was Tom Baker like at the read through? Because one hears stories about him being rather harsh on certain scripts.
Yeah, I've told this story a few times, but yeah. So I was coming down to London for the read through and acting, and I got a phone call from Chris, and in that phone call, he said, "Listen, when you're at the read through, Tom, he said Tom usually is quite critical of a script. I mean, like he will tear it apart verbally. He typically will do that. Whatever he says, can you please not hit him? He's our leading man." And I was like, "Oh, oh." I mean, there was never any remote chance that I was going to lay a finger on anyone. But it might have been a coded way of saying, "Please don't be upset." And it also let me know that it was his habit to do it. But no, he was fine. I mean, he was good as gold. He came in his Mac, his little plastic bag, as you remember, and and we got on with it, and everyone got on with it, and we had cardboard models of the sets and things, but yeah, it was nice to have had that heads up from Chris if something had happened. And actually, maybe made it extra nice that Tom wasn't like that. So I was grateful to Chris for that.
I know I've said this before. One of my favorite Tom Baker acting moments is in part 3 of Full Circle when he has his confrontation with the Deciders. They are standing there high above him with the lights turning on, and they're meant to intimidate and impress him. And of course, he ends up turning the tables on them. And considering, of course, the more comedic elements that he had brought into the show in season 17, I much preferred this version of the Doctor. So that must have been very much fun for you to write. And he certainly did great things with the material.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember all of it. That I remember from draft 1, that scene, and it was always there, the thing of the Deciders being in darkness, and then for the effect and to intimidate anyone who came into the Great Book Room, they would be lit on different levels. Just make this intimidating entrance. And yeah, having the Doctor being so angry was just natural in the circumstances, because we had this character, the Marsh Child, and he'd obviously be extra protective and angry about the treatment of the Marsh Child. And Tom just did it brilliantly, I think. A number of people have pointed out that scene, and Rob Shearman, I think it's a Doctor Who magazine, like 200 Moments thing or something, and Rob picked that out as one of his moment. Which is really nice. But yeah, the kudos there goes to Tom for his performance. So yeah, really quite something powerful.
So how much did you keep in touch with Chris over the years?
Not a great deal. We kept in touch from time to time. We didn't see each other that often, and in fact, we had a falling out on Twitter. There was an issue. I discovered that there was a website that was making audiobooks freely available, where they'd rip them and were pirating them, make them available. And I went on Twitter and it had a Twitter presence. And I went on Twitter and said something like, if anyone following me is following, I'm going to give it a week. If there's anyone on here who's following that site, and I didn't name it, but I said, like, you know what it is if you know what it is, and I don't like it. Then after a week, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna block you, and it'd be your decision. And Chris kind of came back, and I couldn't quite believe it. He was kind of standing up for the right of people to rip CDs, pirate them, and make them available. And yeah, I was very much not of that opinion, and actually he was saying things to me that I thought were not the comments of a friend, and we did kind of fall out over that. But then we came back together, and kind of gloriously we got together to record an extra on the season 18 Blu-ray set called The Writer's Room.
Yes.
Where he and I and John Flanagan and Steve Gallagher, the writers of Megalos and Warriors Gate as well, were taken to this pub in North London by Chris Chapman. And we filmed us chatting about the stories of that season, all the stories of the season. And I think it's 35 minutes on the Blu-ray, but we were there for 4 hours, and we had a really good time.
That is a wonderful documentary, and I covered that on the Trap One podcast when the season 18 Blu-ray came out, probably about more than 5 years ago at this point. But it really was fun to watch you sit in the room and talk about the old times and talk about the scripts.
Yeah, and I was sat right next to Chris, and I just loved chinwagging with him and with the other guys as well. And there was at one point where he's a bit critical of Terence, and I think based on maybe his particular experience with that one script, and Chris maybe not being as versed in the history of Doctor Who, and I did kind of say, well, hang on a minute, this is the governor you're talking about, and but I mean, I wasn't having a real go at him, but I just chipped in on Terence's behalf, really. But there was a nice thing that I've just mentioned this elsewhere a couple of days ago, but there was a thing at the outset that day where Chris had got there first, and he was drinking an all that non-alcoholic lager, and just before we started filming, Chris Chapman was asked, going to get the drinks in for us to sit around the table having this chat. We're going to film, and John Flanagan said to me and Steve Gallagher, he said, I think we should follow Chris's example. He's got a non-alcoholic drink there. I think we should do this. We should do the professional thing and do the same thing. And Steve Gallagher and I looked at each other, made a mental connection, and said, nope. Nope. Oh, I'll have a pint of best, please. And Steve followed suit. And like I said, we were there for 4 hours. it was nice with beer and German sausage and whatever. And there's just a little flash to that, because that was before the cameras were rolling. But there is a thing on the documentary where John says, I think kind of pointedly, I'll have the same as Chris. I'll have a half of that, And but Steve and I, no. But it was a lovely, lovely day. It was a lovely sunny day as well. It was quite hot. It was really lovely. And actually, on the back of Chris and I had fallen out. I was on the London Underground with him and Steve Gallagher, and Chris and Steve got off at their stop, and I was still on the train. And then Chris kind of was heading to the door, and then came back and said, Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for forgiving me. And I said, Chris, mate, there's nothing to forgive. This is great. It's been a wonderful day. It's brilliant to see you again. And that was it. That was kind of lovely. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. I know Chris and Terrence certainly got their swings in at one another. I know when Terrence did the novelization of State of Decay, he accused Chris of having made up a word that appears in the television version.
Oh, that rings a bell. What is it?
Technicotica.
Oh, right. He also made up charged vacuum embodiment because I was given the E-Space trilogy to introduce, and the charged vacuum embodiment was on the brief for that, and I went away to research it. And back in the day, to research it, you're off down the library or whatever, or getting a dictionary out. So I think I did find embodiment was like a box and a box and a box. I think. But there was me thinking, because I knew this is another thing. And the first time I met Chris, I knew he was all about the science and the science being right and the terminology being right. And he mentioned new scientists to me and that he was looking there for ideas. And we met a guy called John Gribben. I'm not sure it was that first time or then another time I was with him, who was a guy who'd written a book about black holes that I think Chris was looking at as potentially a source of stories. And so I just assumed charged vacuum embodiment was an actual thing, but no, he'd made it up. But I did a lot of digging around before I came to that conclusion. I might even have asked them in the end, "Yeah, you bugger, did you? You'd made this up." Well, I needed to know it, but I wanted to know, if it was real,
And of course, he didn't invent the season long story arc, but he may have discovered the season long story arc because he brings your ideas back full circle, so to speak, in Legopolis, where the charged vacuum embodiment ends up
Yeah,
being the thing that saves the universe, which of course brings me to this lovely novelization, one of my top 10
yeah,
books ever.
yeah.
When you were writing Full Circle and you were doing your own novelization, did you speak with Chris about the process of writing the novelizations? Because he certainly did three of them in the end.
No, I just did my own thing. I was asked if Terence could write my book. I said, no, I'd like to do it myself. And I felt they'd become quite slight and whatever. And I wanted to do something a little more detailed, a little more, an experience for a reader sort of thing. And so I really just did my own thing. And I see really, I think without even discussing it with each other, Steve Gallagher did the same thing. And other writers did the same thing. And Chris definitely does. I mean, again, I only found this out a few years ago, but for Full Circle, they reduced the font size to make it fit the page count, and I can see that they've done that with Chris's as well. The font size is not as big as it was for the earlier slight novelizations.
Yeah, compared to one of Terrence's 100-page books with wide margins, Legopolis challenges my eyesight now that I'm on the wrong side of 50.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it myself, and I know it's lovely stuff. And the audiobooks are quite something as well. And the audiobook of Legopolis is read by Chris himself, of course, isn't it?
Yes, as an actor himself, he does a remarkably good job with it. So I see you have all three of his books with you, as I do with me. So what do these books mean to you, not just as a Doctor Who fan, but as a reader in general?
Yeah, the target reading experience became different at this point. Having written for the show, and I won't name him, he might not want me to say, but someone who's written for the modern series has said, having written for the series, you watch it differently, you experience it differently. We also had I got my first video cassette recorder just before season 18. There was something that was in season 18 I was quite keen to record. And so after that point, reading novelizations, you were reading novelizations of things that you were very familiar with the televisual content. I didn't get all the books after this stage, but I did get all the Chris's because Chris was a friend, and I just really, really enjoyed Legopolis first of all, and then Castrovalva in particular is something that really gripped me, and I think it's an awesome audiobook as well. It's narrated by Peter Davison, and in that case. And so it was a particular joy to come to these books. And Castrovalva, I think in particular, is one where you get a better sense than television could convey of the wonderful concept of Castrovalva itself and the pathos, the tragedy of the characters, the citizens, particularly Sharavan, as they come to realize that they are fiction and that the place they live is a fiction. Very, very cleverly done. It's kind of it's a little lopsided. We spend a long time in the TARDIS, and I know it's either Chris or John told me they decided after Castrovalva they weren't going to do that again and have an episode set entirely in the TARDIS. The look just wasn't that great. But once we get Castrovalva into the story, it's really quite something. And the book does that justice considerably more, I think, than the TV episodes. But the TV episodes themselves are so original, I think. The dialogue is very, very rich. And a couple of scenes, like when the doctor's talking to the little girl and going over the numbers and then realizes Adric, he remembers Adric. Where's Adric? Because he says to the little girl about, giving her a badge of mathematical excellence. And then the wonderful reveal, the doctor knows there's something wrong with the books in the library. He's talking to Sharavan, and it's Sharavan who reveals, the books are very old, but they tell the history of Castrovalva up to the present day. The present day in a genuinely old book. And that's such a key clue and a very, very clever thing to reveal, the fiction or the fiction and the artificiality of that environment and their lives and their personal histories. I remember reading it and being absolutely compelled. I enjoyed the TV show, but the novelization of Castrovalva really, really drew me in. I recommend it and the audiobook. The audiobook's extremely well done. Nice soundscape for it as well.
I'm glad you brought up that line. For me, that line reflects an interiority to the characters that you don't get in certain other Doctor Who TV stories or novelizations. The fact that it's Shardavan who noticed this as the librarian.
Yeah.
And of course, there's also Peter Davison's lame joke about how, well, you're the librarian because you're tall. You can reach the top shelf.
Yes. Yeah.
I also enjoy the line on the Castrovalva novelization where the Doctor had discovered throughout his long lives that experience is no substitute for books.
Yes.
I have quoted that. You get all these wonderful lines in his books which just comment and give a philosophy. And again, Terrence did wonderful novelizations, but for Christopher's 3, he adds a little more to the inner lives of these characters that makes them pop off the page.
Yeah, I think I think I do hope there's a mug somewhere that says that experience is no replacement for books. That's yeah.
I may have to get Jim Sangster to put that on a T-shirt for his Redbubble store.
Oh, Jim will be on it right now, won't he?
I'm
Yeah.
positive. And of course, for the Frontios novelization, which he had written later on in the series after he was freelance, he gives a new ending to the book because the character of Cockerell kind of vanishes halfway through part 4. Chris circles back around, gives him a happy ending, and makes his progression from a no good Nick to a hero the theme of the book, which you don't get on television. So even after the fact, he's going back and reworking his stories to make them a little bit more complete.
Yeah. Frontios is my favorite Peter Davison story. I mean, I rate a lot of them. Obviously, Castrovalva and got mentioned Enlightenment and Earthshock, of course, but and the Five Doctors. But Frontios, for me, again, it's just got originality, some very original ideas. I remember on first viewing, I wasn't too sure about the idea of the TARDIS being blown apart and then Tractators getting it back together, but it works. And that excavating machine with the human being inside it, which is something, again, it works a little better in the book than it does on screen. A very hard thing to realize, as does the effect of the bodies being dragged underground. It looks a bit, well, it's very hard to comprehend actually on screen until we're actually told, what we've just been watching. But again, the concept is really good, and the characterizations are excellent. Oh, there's that line The Doctor says, I shouldn't be here. If anyone asks, I came and went like a summer breeze. It's lovely. It's lovely.
When would have been the last time that you and Chris got to speak? Was it the Blu-ray recording or a little bit later on?
Actually, yeah, it was the Blu-ray recording. I mean, I visited him at I visited him at home in about 2009-10. I'm trying to think. Oh no, the Twitter thing would have been after that. Yeah, I visited at home, and it's a story I told on Facebook actually. When I heard we'd lost Chris, another thing that just shows. I mean, maybe I don't know, his eccentricity or uniqueness or whatever. But yeah, I'd been working at Scotland Yard that day, and I mean, we kept in touch, and one of those things you say, oh, you must come round, come and see me. Anyway. So I finished work, went to Hampstead to his house, and we were chatting, and it was lovely to see him. And he made me a cup of coffee, one of his very sci-fi looking, I thought at the time, coffee machines. Lovely cup of coffee. We sat in his front room, and this is in the evening, and we're chatting away about this and that and the other, having a wonderful chat. It was really, really good, and it was getting darker. And it's getting darker, and then it got very dark, and it got to the point I couldn't see him, and he just didn't put a light on, even though it got to the point we could not see each other. I mean, even my night vision didn't even cut in. I can't remember what the windows were like there. Or obviously, it wasn't a moonlit night or something. But it's almost it got to the point, beyond the point, I felt I could comfortably say, "Are you going to put a light on?" I've got a neighbour who, when he moved in for 4 years, called me Alan, and again, I got to the point I couldn't correct it because it would be like, why didn't you correct me the first time you heard it? But 4 years, and it was the same that night, saying to Chris, not saying to Chris, "Can you turn a light on?" And it was just the oddest thing, and we just carried on talking. And the only reason I knew he was there is because I hear his voice. But it was a lovely evening. It was really, really nice.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, of course, absolutely one of my favorite Doctor Who writers, and I consider the Logopolis book one of my favorite novels of all time, and Castrovalva is right behind it. So a
Quite
loss
right.
that I'm feeling very keenly, and I'm really glad you were here to talk about it with me. So I thank you very much for that, Andrew.
That's okay. I just want to say something as well. Again, Chris, I talked about, in Francios that, at the first viewing, I didn't really, go with the idea of the TARDIS being ripped apart and then the Tractators being able to put together this, a TARDIS. And that was quite a feature of his writing as well, was um, these quite impossible ideas that somehow worked. And even the thing of like that's in Logopolis trying to land the TARDIS in the Thames so it would flood and clear out. You know, Stephen Moffat wrote I forget where it appears, but this thing about the TARDIS is basically almost an infinite space, so you drain the Thames. So he's written a short story somewhere where he finished up with the TARDIS just in this drained Thames sitting on a mud bank. And whatever. He just had this free ranging imagination, very unique. Oh, and let's not forget, he's given us some staples of Doctor Who mythology and history. He gave us a cloister bell.
That's right.
He gave us a zero room. The cloister bell. How many times has that turned up in the modern series?
The Cloister Bell has turned up more times in the modern series than the Daleks and the Cybermen and the Master all put together, I would reckon.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But well done, Chris. And he's really, he was a unique guy, a quite unique writer, I think, and he really left his mark on people who knew him and on Doctor Who.
And the very last Doctor Who story broadcast in his lifetime, The Reality War, features the return of the Zero Room. So I hope he had the occasion to find out about that.
Yeah, there's a thing. I hope so.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your memories with us.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.